Okay, great. So I want to welcome Jenny McPhee. Thank you, Jenny, for joining us, taking time out of your schedule and joining us from Italy. I wanted to introduce Jenny first, and then we're going to ask her some questions on their process of translating Natalia Ginzburg's book, Family Lexicon. So Jenny McPhee is the author of the novels The Center of Things, No Ordinary Matter, and A Man of No Moon, and she co-authored Girls, Ordinary Girls and Their Extraordinary Pursuits. Her translations include books by the authors Natalia Ginzburg, Primo Levi, Maria Ortese, and please forgive my Italian pronunciation, Curzio Malaparte, and Pope John Paul II. I like that. That was an interesting one thrown in there. She's the academic director of the Noncredit program at the Center for Applied Liberal Arts at New York University School of Professional Studies, and she's on the faculty of New York University's Masters in Translation and Interpreting program. She's taught literary translation at Princeton University and at the European School of Literary Translation. And congratulations, she was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2020. So thank you, Jenny, for joining us. I really appreciate it. So I wanted to start off, well, the first thing I wanted to do was thank one of our members. I did some of the questions, but Sam did most of them, Sam Mowry, so I wanted to thank her, give her credit for most of the interview questions. And she's here too, I see now. So, and then I wanted to ask you, Jenny, could you tell us a little bit more about your background, specifically in literature and translation? And also, what's your background and how you learned Italian, some of the background and how you learned Italian?
So I'll try to keep that answer short because it's a long
answer.
But so the Italian, you know, I have no Italian connection whatsoever. My background is completely Scottish, German, you know, I'm American, but so, you know, I came across Italy when I was about 17 and I saw La Dolce Vita. And I thought, you know, I like that. I loved the aesthetic. I loved the language. I loved everything about it. So I went to my university actually didn't even offer Italian, but I did manage to do my junior year abroad at the University of Florence. It was a Rutgers program, but they put you right into the university. My Italian was not good, so I actually took English courses at the University of Florence. And, you know, in the romantic novel, or the noir, also in the noir. And my English professor, who was Italian, wanted to help me with my Italian. And he said, you know, just read everything by Natalia Ginzburg. And so that was my first introduction to her. And she really taught me Italian. And I was also an aspiring writer. And she was incredibly influential on me. She writes also nonfiction, or wrote nonfiction. She has a couple of essays that, you know, she has a lot of essays, but one in particular, which is called Il mio mestiere, which, you know, my vocation. And it just was so resonant with me. You know, so she's been a big part of my life from very early on. How I actually came to be a translator came much later in my life, when I was working in publishing. And I was working at Alfred A. Knopf, and they did a lot of, you know, they're well known for their literature and translation, but at that point, they none of the senior editors really wanted to work on the translations. So they would buy them, but then they'd hand off to me the editing part of the translation. And so that's where I first got my real training in translation, was in editing translation.
Oh, neat. Okay.
And, yeah.
You were the editor. They had someone translate it, and you were the editor of that work that came back then, right?
That's exactly right.
I was wondering too, did you ever have the chance to meet Natalia Ginzburg just by chance, or right?
I did not, but we did an event at NYU when the translation first came out, and her daughter Alessandra came, and so that was just fabulous. And then while I was doing the translation, I had certain questions. Obviously, you guys have read it, so there's a lot of dialect and real family lexicon stuff, and so I did get in touch with her son, the historian, and he was very helpful to me.
What's his first, or I did look him up at some point and saw that he was a well-known historian. What's his name?
Yeah, his name is Curzio Ginzburg.
Carlo, yeah.
And he's a great writer himself. And just because you guys have read the book, the one that I had, the issue I had that was the most, well, there were many difficult issues, but one that I asked him about was Barbizon, because who they call Barbizon, this Uncle Barbizon. And I was like, oh, how do I translate that? Because it has barba.
Oh yeah, I do remember that. Tell us how you did it again. I remember when I read it thinking about it.
Okay, so other translations translated it as whiskers, one of them, because there are two previous translations. And the other one was mustache man or something like that. And I just didn't know what to do. And so I wrote to him and he said, you know what, in certain cases, when you're doing translation, it's really important to preserve the language difference. And sometimes you just leave it as it is. And so that's what I did with Barbizon.
It was Barbizon in English, right? Okay, and I think I knew that it meant that because of French, because I know it's or whatever. So to me, it was totally natural, and I remember thinking that makes total sense. But you're right, when I think about it that way, then other people might not. Yeah, that was nice. Yeah. So yeah, I liked hearing your background. I think that was similar maybe to a bunch of our, I don't know, just how you went and studied abroad, and like I'm not as accomplished as you in the end, but I mean the idea of how, I was interested in French, and then I went to France, and when I was a junior, and I studied French, but it was like in an American program, blah blah blah. Anyway, but that's interesting. Yeah, I've heard about the Rutgers program too over the years.
Well, I think a lot of us translators kind of fall into it in different ways, because there wasn't actually, there's a tradition in Europe, absolutely, of translation as a profession. But in the United States, it's only recently that you really can get a master's in translation, or even that it's now being integrated into creative writing programs. So I think it's shifting in how it's perceived, translation, but it hasn't, we've been the handmaids.
Yeah, so. That's interesting too. I was doing a couple years ago, I'm currently on the board of the American Translators Association, and when I was running, then when you're up in the stage and anybody in the audience of the members can ask you questions, and somebody said, oh, can any of you, just a yes or no question, raise your hand if you had formal training? And I just raised my hand for no, but I thought, that's really kind of unfair because I'm too old. I mean, to have been in one of the most famous programs, Kent State University, started after I was out of graduate school, I think. And so anyway, it was just kind of like you're saying, we don't really have that tradition as much. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, we kind of touched on this, but I want to hear more about it. The next question is, so in Family Lexicon, can you comment on the funny words that the father uses all the time? Some examples are, I don't even know if I can say them yet. Taradiddling, dribble drabs, doodledums, and then more generally for the father, what went into picking equivalents for his favorite phrases like nitwitteries, jackass, which is kind of shocking to me in English, and not shocking, but I thought, like, would I use jackass in that term, in that context or whatever? And then the dreaded Negroisms, which I know you talk about in the notes at the end too. And also, kind of tacking this question out at the end, have people reacted to your translations of those? Like, have people given you feedback? Oh, I read that, and here's what I think of that. So talk to us about where you see that.
So, for me, all the sort of made up language that the father uses, but the whole family uses all through, was the challenging, definitely very challenging, but also a lot of fun, like just a lot of fun. And I would, change my mind until you found, in the end, actually, how I would ultimately decide was on sound. So how it sounded in a sentence. So you'd want the meaning right, but you'd also want the sound. So that was sort of my criterion for those words. I mean, they were definitely tough. And as I said, I wrote to Carlo Ginzburg at some point because I just was stumped. Negrigura and negro, that was a really different, challenging thing to have occur on the first page in the or the first and second page.
I know, you sure get your attention. I was like, woo! Yeah.
It does, and here I'm translating my favorite, probably my favorite writer, and I want her to have a big audience, and it's 2015, and I'm like, oh my God, really? I mean, how am I going to do this? And, previous translations had you avoided it and said, use nitwit or, something Yahoo.
That's super interesting too. It's just interesting to me that in our era, you chose to be more true to the original than maybe in a past era, they could have got away with it more. I mean, but they still shied away.
Well, okay, so in really thinking about what Ginzburg was up to, I think it was an incredibly deliberate choice. So the book is really very much about hierarchy and the family structure, and how the family structure actually reflects the political structure, and how even our sort of innocent, what we would call now, just calling your kid a microaggression or a racist remark, offhanded, the father just says it like that. Well, what is the damage that is being done by using this terminology? And she knows what's about to happen in Europe and with the Jews, and so it's very deliberate. She's saying, even this offhanded kind of language that my father uses in the family and in the society, it's not acceptable. So then that's what helped me realize that I had to keep it.
Right, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Message. But if you take it out, you're taking power away from her work by taking it out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that was, another question I had about those was, just in some of them, like doodledums makes me think of what kind of makes sense because of when the book actually took, when the era that she was talking about. Did you think about that too? The era, because it makes me think doodledums makes me think of my grandma, and kind of, like it's going back to that era, sort of. I mean, she was probably a younger woman then, but yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting. That's always interesting in translation, right? Like that's why translations can happen. Every retranslations can happen because actually translations are much more dated than the original. In some
yes,
way.
Yes, I can see that.
Bring our own lexicon to it, but yeah, there's something about Ginzburg's work that is, her language is so incredibly deceptively simple. So, it's really necessary to be very careful about your word choice.
Well, and for that, when I said it made me think doodledum's the word, just because it's kind of nice. It made me think of my grandma, not that it didn't make it seem archaic, but it seemed like, it seemed like it was modern in a way to us to read it, but it seemed like it was harking to that era, is what I felt from that term.
It's true. And then there's this other thing about Ginzburg, that she's very modernist, so but also she's writing about a certain time, and you want to create also you don't want to be too using a vocabulary that's anachronistic or
right.
So,
right.
I mean, all these choices that happen as a translator are really many. And,
yeah, but no, I didn't mean that as a criticism. I meant like it gave me a flavor of that era, but it also was, you know, because it was kind of sweet. Doodle Dums was kind of sweet. So, yeah, okay. So then Sam had a good question. I was just wondering too, did you have a favorite character? And if so, how did that affect your translation? I don't know, just like maybe the view of it or somehow the...
Yeah, it was such an interesting question. So in this book, so every translation is very different, right? And who you get attached to, or, you know, generally my experience is that I'm getting very attached to the author, not to any particular character.
I can see that.
So, and in this book, what's interesting is none of the characters are particularly appealing. I mean, they're all kind of unlikable in their own way.
Well, I thought too, as a reader, not necessarily that, but that like we don't have time to get attached to him really, because it kind of cycles.
And you don't get time, and she's got this real distance from them. So really, my interest, and of course, then there's my own personal interest in Ginzburg, but it happens with every author I translate. It's such an intimate act. I mean, I just feel like I get so close to who the author is and their head and how they think, and because you're really going deeply into them on a, you know, word by word level, and spending so much time in their consciousness. It's pretty interesting for me to have that kind of relationship with a dead author.
I actually have a question that's not in here that just made me think of this, is that because you're an author too, I was thinking as a translator, like I think a lot of times, it's more, I do more commercial stuff, but I think like, gee, did the person even know they use this term? Because as translators, we pick it apart so minutely. And I was thinking, but for an author, I suppose they probably put that care into each word. Like I think, oh, if someone comes back to me as a translator and says, why did you use this word on this page? I literally could tell them almost every single word. Well, I chose that one because the connotation was, you know, and I think, so what do you think about that as an author, as opposed to like me doing commercial work, you know, do you feel like you choose every single word that way?
Yeah, so as an author, translation teaches me more about writing than anything, than reading, anything that I've ever done. So I kind of fell into translation because I was working at Knopf and they needed that Pope's book translated in seconds flat because he was coming for a visit. So they sent me home and gave me a month and said, sit down, you know, and I didn't even speak Italian that well. And so I did that. And then after that experience, I thought, you know what, this cannot be my last experience with translation. So then I did translate a novel, and I started to see what kind of just focus and grappling with language translation was. I just loved it. It was everything I loved about writing without the horrible pressure of the blank page. So then I thought, oh, well, what if I let's try translating people who can teach me. And I feel like I'm mentored when I translate.
Oh, neat. That's a neat take on it. So I guess looking back now, in your translation of Family Lexicon particularly, do you think, like we all have regrets, even, like I said, even for my thing, like some contract, oh no, I should have said it this way, or you know, you wake up in the middle of the night. So do you have any thoughts about that for Family Lexicon? Or do you?
Okay. So yes, there's always things, right? But okay, I translated this actually in 2013, and there was a problem with the estate, and rights and the whole thing. And so it seemed like it was never going to get published, which was sad for me, but I was still so grateful and happy that I had translated it because I had this great relationship with her. So if that was going to be what the universe dealt me, okay. So then the rights thing was resolved, and this was actually published finally in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
when our whole world changed.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, the book actually, it was always there, but it had this entirely new resonance,
Mm-hmm.
because now I really understood in a deeply personal way this idea of a creeping
Mm-hmm.
fascism
Mm-hmm.
coming, and everybody denying and saying, oh, he's a fool, he'll never get elected,
Mm-hmm.
about Mussolini, or
Mm-hmm.
he'll never do that, and then it creeps.
I totally thought that reading that part, reading the part about he's a fool, and the person, I can't think who it was, so I'm sorry to whoever it was who suggested it. And then after because we vote on, I forgot to say that for the book club, we vote on books. I offer 3 books every time, and then we vote on which ones we're going to read. And the person who had suggested it was really happy and said that it was chosen, and said kind of what you're saying, like, I think it's really important to read this book in this time. And so,
amazing relevance about
Yeah.
social structure, family
Yeah.
structure, how it all, anyway. So then, of course, it had been in a drawer for 3 years, and I took it out and reread it, and it was one of the most amazingly beautiful, I'm hypercritical of myself. It was one of the most amazing, beautiful experiences of my life, because I was like, wow, did I do this? It just sang. It sang to me, this
Mm-hmm.
book. And, I'm sure there are things that I would change in it, but overall,
that's so wonderful. I mean, that you really felt it was a piece of art. I mean, that you created art, and you appreciated that when you looked back at it with other eyes, with all those years, not all those years, but those several years.
It was an amazing experience, not one I have very often.
No, that's neat.
Ever.
And that you could have, like you said, not be hypercritical, but appreciate it for the art that you created. So good. So I don't think we covered this. Tell me, I don't think we did. How did you come to translate this particular book? I don't think we covered that exactly.
Yeah, okay, so I pitched for years ideas to New York Review Books,
Mm-hmm.
To translate different things, different books, especially women. I'm very adamant about translating women, even though I've translated men, but especially as I go along. And I pitched, and Edwin Frank, who's the editorial director, just would always politely say no. And then, one day he called me up and wrote me an email and said, well, what do you think? Would you do Ginzburg's Family Lexicon? And I was like, I just fell off my chair. It was like the one book that I would most like to translate in the world. And he was asking me, after years of me pitching other things.
And that's because this imprint, they do reprint, important books like that, right? That's kind of what they do, is what
they do. A lot. They're starting to do some more like contemporary original stuff, but mostly they're doing retranslations of classics.
Yeah, that was interesting too. That it was fun reading about the different reviews of the retranslation, and it was interesting, like you said, that it made it more accessible to people today than the older translation. I like that idea that you said, which I think is probably true, that the translations when they get older don't hold up as well as the original work, maybe, because it's, so.
Also, in literary or any translation, really, there is no definitive translation. There's no, so what if I translate this and somebody else translates it, we're gonna have 2 completely different works. So that's why I'm a great believer in retranslation. Translate as much as we can originally, but also retranslation. The more you do, the better it is.
Be accessible to more people in different ways, yeah. So you kind of talked about this, but how much of Ginzburg writing had you read before translating this particular book? And then I have, how much, if any, did you read after knowing you were going to translate? It sounds like you read, well, you can tell us, but it sounds like you'd read most of her works before that anyway.
Yeah, I love her plays. Actually, I was very very familiar with her work, and I still, it's, you know how you have those writers that you just return to all the time, like they're your go-to people. She was that for me. So it's funny though, I never thought of I never thought I would have the opportunity to translate her. You know?
Or like you said, probably, I mean, I'm assuming, like we all are when we're 17, you read it when you're 17. My kids read the French Astérix, which is nothing like this, but you know, it's a masterpiece in its own right. But they tell me, Mom, I read it when I was 5, and then I read it when I was 10, and then I read it when I was 17, and how they see it differently. So in a much more sophisticated way, I see that, you know, like you're saying, you read it when you were 17, and you would get different things out of it throughout your life.
Yeah.
Going back to that same author, yeah. So, let's see. Oh, I had your notes at the end of the English version were very helpful to me, and I didn't realize they were there till after. And then I kind of had to reread parts of it to kind of get the full benefit of them. But I said the book covered a specific time period and a set of related events in a specific way. You know, it wasn't just like you said, it's really kind of a different approach that Ginzburg took to the way of telling the story of their little microcosm mirroring the bigger picture. So did you personally have to do a lot of research to understand that time period and or events that you're already familiar with, but in sufficient detail? Because I'm more familiar with French history, but of course know the real basic stuff for Italian, you know, like World War II, whatever, but not at that level, you know.
So part of why I love translation is also is the research. I mean, it's endless research, you know, of course. Every word you, of course, want to know. It's social history, it's etymology, it's everything about it. But also you want to know the culture. So the problem with footnotes is that publishers don't like them. So they think they get in the way of the novel. I don't agree with that, but so what they do is do them as endnotes. So, but it's too bad that people don't know until the end. I mean, that's why at least maybe even a little footnote would be helpful, but they don't do that.
I was thinking as the reader, maybe you could give it feedback to your publisher contacts that at least, I guess, I don't know, did it say somewhere there were notes? Because I thought, like, at the end I was like, oh, yeah, that they should maybe say somewhere in the beginning, check out the notes at the back.
I know. I'm so proud of those notes. Of course, I did the same thing in my Curzio Malaparte book, the translation. And then I put one note in there that was just completely wrong. I identified a book as written by a different author.
Okay, that happens sometimes. They'll fix it in the next publishing.
Right, that's the one I remember. But I do love doing the footnotes because I feel like any extra context we can have, the better.
That's funny because I think about in college, and I can't think, who wrote The Women's Room? Does anybody remember who wrote The Women's Room? The author who wrote The Women's Room, Marilyn somebody. I can't think of her last name, but I read that in college. I didn't read that in college. I read another book of hers where she talked about this kind of obscure thing in Algeria, which I actually knew about because I was writing papers on it in grad school. And I wrote, and that wasn't just a footnote of hers. She wasn't a translator, but she was writing about this real kind of obscure thing. And she wrote wrong. She talked about one of the sides in this war, and she had them mixed up, you know. And so I wrote to her, and that was right back before internet. So I wrote to her on paper, and she wrote back to me, and you know, her stationery, and she said, I'm sure she was kind of annoyed, but she said, oh, thank you for pointing that out. It'll be finished in the next publication, fixed in the next publication. So like you said, they'll fix it, or no one will notice it, or some nerdy grad student will notice it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I you know, at this stage in the game, I relish mistakes. I actually think mistakes are the most interesting thing about what we do, because they can teach us the most.
Right. Like, yeah. So that's fun. So, yeah, the next question I have to tell you what I have. In addition, there were quite a few literary references in the book that Ginzburg wove into there. And I felt unworthy reading all them because I thought, I can tell this is a reference, but I don't understand it. And later I told my sister-in-law, who's probably reads 3 to 4 books a week, I recommended this to her, and I said, you are more worthy than me because you will get a lot more of those literary references. But what can you tell us about translating those for today's world and how you approach that?
Well, again, this idea, which I don't really believe in, is lost in translation. But, there's just going to be some things lost and some things found. And, Ginzburg was a translator. So she knew Proust really intimately because she translated Proust. It's riddled with literary references. And are those going to translate? You try and do them as much as possible without being heavy-handed, or then you try and put a footnote if you can. It's just one of the, I think, wonderful challenges.
Well, those might also be not generational, but more like time period specific too, or something. Like, maybe obviously her contemporaries were more familiar with some of those than we might be too. So
yeah, like Cesare Pavese, his appearance in this book is very relevant, and he was a huge influence in her life, and he's a huge literary figure in Italy, but somebody in America would have no idea. So,
right. Yeah, the generational time period and also just cultural background, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so... Well, so now kind of shifting gears a little bit, I guess one of the answers to the question I'm going to ask you is that you translated this book already. But we had a question, if you could translate anything else, like you said, if it's a retranslation or anything that you could translate. So, and maybe we'll have one of your publishers listening. What would you translate now after you accomplish this life goal of translating this work?
Yeah, so of course I keep, since that I've done other books, and the Guggenheim is for another book that I'm doing by Elsa Morante, who's a really great writer from the 40s, 50s, 60s. But let's see, actually who I would like to translate the most, I wonder if I will ever do it, and it goes against my whole woman thing, because I only want to translate women, but I would really love to translate Dante.
Oh, okay. That would for sure be a retranslation, yeah.
Well, he's translated so much.
Yeah.
But I would love to, one of my big, a person that I admire just so much is Emily Wilson. And, I loved how she brought this female perspective to the Odyssey. And I feel like it has been translated once by a woman, The Inferno, but I would like to just bring a kind of feminist perspective.
No, that's super interesting. That's super interesting. Like you said, it's not, he's obviously a larger than life figure. Whether it's a woman or a man, but like you're saying, that's not necessarily getting away from your ideal of translating women. It's translating as a woman, which is also really important.
Yes, translating as a woman.
Yeah, and it does seem, I don't know for literary translation, it seems to me, just as an outside observer, because I don't do literary, I've done like little kids books, like that's kind of commercial though, it's not like you guys do, but it seems like to me, and I don't know the real numbers, when I look at that, it seems even in there that men are not overrepresented, but when I look at translators in general, there's so many women. And I'm sure men are wonderful translators too, but it's always kind of surprising to me when I look at the literary world. I think, where do all these guys come from? But I suppose maybe that's related to academics, or I don't know. Anyway, that's interesting.
So, just on women in translation, women are translated the 25%, so 75% less than men. And that not relating in any way to how many women are published. So for example, in Japan, male, female authors are almost equal in what's published, but in what's translated into English, it's like 20% female. So we have a problem in that what publishers are choosing to translate is men. Now, women translators have always been around, and there are a number of us, but the ones who become sort of leading literary figures, the Gregory Rabassa, men tend to dominate top of the field.
No, that's interesting.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
That's changing.
Yeah, I have heard a lot more women translators in recent years, but it just seems like what you said. I wonder why that is. And because coming from your background as publishing, I'm interested in, if you feel comfortable saying that, because when I read, I actually, now, as I've gotten older, I do purposely look at, is it a man or a woman? But I might not have done that. And like in most of my life, I didn't purposely look at picking a book out if it was a man or a woman. And I wonder, do publishers look at that? I guess they do. They must do it. I know.
Well, they may not, they may have
Not
say,
constantly.
oh, we just published what's good.
Right. Well, they know because they're dealing with the person. I mean,
the
but
misogyny, the
right.
racism in publishing is pretty strong.
And that was kind of naive of me to say that, I guess, because I'm thinking, me as a reader, if I don't literally look at the name of the author and I just kind of pick the book out, that's totally different than the person, the publisher who's working with the author. Of course, they know it's a man. I mean, or a woman. They're dealing with them often.
Yeah, and the there's this great group that counts the number of men and the number of women. It's called the Vita statistics, and there's just the inequity for women in publishing and women. It's quite striking.
Just a reflection, I guess, of our human condition.
Yes.
I mean, it happens in other areas. Why wouldn't it happen there? And yeah. So, well, tell us. Could you spell that out so we can look that up? The Vita statistics. Is it VITA or
VIDA?
VIDA. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's kind of interesting.
The Vita count. It's called the Vita count. Okay. And they do it both for publishers and they do it for magazines.
Oh, okay.
So how many women does the New York Review of Books publish a year versus how many men?
Okay, and then on our
and how many books are reviewed by men versus women? I mean the statistics are very.
Oh, that's super interesting. I mean, after we're done, I'm going to run upstairs and look at that. I mean, just like you said, it sounds like it has a lot of interesting data to kind of.
It's really interesting.
Think about from different angles. So then, well, tell us what are.
And the woman who started Women in Translation Month, August. Her name Maital Radinsky. She also has a blog about with great. Oh, they're great with great statistics on women in translation. Really.
Oh yeah, and I was aware of that, but not. And I just started reading her blog the other day, actually. So now she has really interesting stuff. So I'll look at that for her statistics too, because it's still. Tell me, guys, it's still Women in Translation Month, right? Or was that last month? Is it? We're still.
No, it's August.
It is August. Yeah.
So we're still in August, although it already feels like September, doesn't it? It's like
mentally, and like we said, like a week is a decade. So, and then tell us about some of your favorite authors and books in any language, in translation or in English or in Italian or whatever.
Well, let's see.
Or maybe not your favorites, because I know it's hard. Like you don't want to pick if you have children, you don't want to pick your favorite child, but maybe ones that you would counsel us to go toward.
No, I'll tell you. So I have. This is not my library behind me, although I wish it were.
I was going to ask about that for everybody else too.
It's a now no longer existing library in Cincinnati, but it's a public library, and they knocked it down sadly in the 50s. But I do have an extensive library, and I do have special shelves for about 5 special authors. And one is Ginzburg. Another is Muriel Spark. She's Scottish. She's very influential on me. Another is Clarice Lispector. Now she's Brazilian, so she's in translation. Really interesting writer. Very different. I'm not sure experimental is the right word, but she's just other. She's very really incredible work. And then Willa Cather, American, and Thomas Bernhard, who's a German, Austrian writer.
Okay.
Those are the people who make me uncomfortable. So one of my criterion for, my sort of most favorite writers in the sense that they make me think and all the time and challenge any kind of comfort level.
Mm.
I sort of feel like that's what art should do. It should please, but it should also disturb.
Mm. I'm taking notes because I'm going to put that in our notes for everybody. Thank you. Yeah. And then is it Sparks for Muriel? Is Sparks, you said?
Muriel Spark.
Okay. Spark. Okay. I'll find that one. Okay, awesome. Oh, thank you so much, Jenny, for doing that.
Sure.
I don't.
Absolutely.
For some weird woman randomly emailing you. Well, that's why I always figure I'll send a copy of the newsletter too, so you think like, oh, it really is legit or whatever, and you can answer me instead of kind of. I know it's kind of shocking out of the blue.
So I'm happy to take questions if anybody wants.
Oh yeah, that would be wonderful for you guys to run
chat, or you just unmute yourself, or
yeah. Does anybody want to? Sam, I know you had a different question. Putting her on this spot.
Are the people in your group
I don't remember even a little bit.
What was that, Jenny? Sorry.
I was wondering if the group is just all sorts of, are you all translators, or are you all just interested in translation?
I think everybody's a translator. There was one woman who came a couple times ago who said she was interested, but most everybody I know out of the 300 people, I mean, I wouldn't stop someone from joining, but everybody's pretty much practicing translation.
Oh, very cool. And you all do different kinds of translations. So some transcreation, some patents, some, you know, all different things.
Well, Jen, you tell us what you do. Jen.
I added myself there, didn't I? Mostly commercial. Almost entirely commercial for, should I say commercial reasons? But
yes.
But within that, what kind? Tell us. I know what she does, but it's interesting to hear. And within commercial, what do you specialize in?
Legal, financial, and IT. The sweet spot is like a non-disclosure agreement for some really nice IT product that I can't talk about. You know, that's always really fun. Or I love it when the tech companies sue each other. That's delightful. Especially if you get some really good lawyers arguing.
Wow. And what's your language pair, Jen? Or do you have more than one?
No, just one. One's good. French and English. But yeah,
so are you
recently
working mostly with France, or do you work out of with African countries?
I do some stuff with African countries. I actually had the good luck, like Eve was saying, most of us didn't actually get the benefit of a full translation program, but my senior seminar for my French degree was it was all focused not just on Francophone Africa, but sub-Saharan, not the North African stuff. And I have found that since I've become an active translator, that's been very useful, having just any kind of basis for understanding of the culture and
yeah. So
colonial
last
history.
night I saw this amazing movie called Atlantique on Netflix. Have you guys heard about this?
Mm.
It's from the Côte d'Ivoire.
Yes, it's so good.
Isn't it amazing?
Sorry.
Was that Sam? Oh, awesome. Okay. Sam, is that on Netflix in the US too? Because sometimes it differs from Europe. Have you seen it on Netflix? I'll look it up.
It's either on Netflix or it's on Amazon or something.
Okay.
Because I know it's available. Also, did you take my video away?
Oh,
I didn't.
Hold on.
I can't.
think you took it away.
I can't video myself.
There you go.
Hey, there we go. No, I clicked the thing that said start video, and it said the host said you can't do this. And I was like, oh, okay.
But I saw you knitting
my
earlier.
knitting was Yeah, see, maybe my knitting was distracting, and that's why I wasn't on video anymore. That's fine. No, I've seen Atlantique. I had the privilege to see it at the Toronto International Film Festival last year. Which I selected as one of the movies that we were going to see because it took place in Africa at all. Basically, like, you never get filmmakers from Africa. And she was there. Mati Diop, the director, was there and talked about it a bit, and that was so cool.
Oh wow! So is the director a woman?
Yes.
That is so great.
Yeah, she's Senegalese.
Senegalese.
Yeah, I know that there's quite a film industry in Nigeria in particular. Yeah, yep. They have just this amazing science fiction culture, which is like slightly sideways of what you expect. It's very interesting.
Did you say in Senegal, Jen, or where did you say? I didn't hear what you said.
Nigeria.
Nigeria, okay.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say Sam is a real movie. What do you call that? You know, a movie festival. A movie festival is wonderful. Goes to many movie festivals and knows lots about movies.
Yes, I have a dear friend I've been friends with for a decade. He's a doctor and he has doctor money, but doesn't care what we see. So he literally pays for us to go to Sundance and TIFF every year, and I get to program it, and it's amazing. So
wow.
I cannot recommend more highly being best friends with someone before they start med school. And then, that relationship just carries on for like a decade and a half. And then he's like, okay, I bought our tickets to TIFF. The schedule comes out this day. And I go, is there anything you wanted to see? And he goes, because he gets really overwhelmed with the too many options. And I'm just like, yes, tell me all the directors, tell me the things, tell me the writers. It's so exciting. Sorry, that's unrelated.
Write to Sam for advice if you need it. Dolores, I wanted to ask you if Dolores, if you had something you wanted to, you always have interesting ideas if you wanted to contribute.
Oh, hi everybody. Thank you, Eve, for this opportunity. I would like to ask Jenny if she has a special way of when you begin the very first page of a book, if you follow a daily journal, or how do you begin with it? For example, we usually have short or long translations, but we have a calendar, or we say, well, every day I will have 4 hours for this project. Or how do you begin with such a big task a book?
Okay, so each book has been different. And it's my translation, believe it or not, is my procrastination. So when I can't really work on my own writing, whatever, my novel or whatever reason, or I really don't want to do my work for NYU, I go and translate. My translation is my haven. However, so I just go to it all the time, and I never have to have a schedule because it's all I want to do. But with the latest book, which is Elsa Morante's first novel, it's 800 pages.
Oh, wow.
So I had to put myself on a schedule. And so for that, if I'm going to finish this, I need to do at least 3 pages a day.
With 800 pages, I hope you love her a whole lot.
Yeah.
So many pages. Oh my God.
So true. It's really, I do. I think she's really great, but it's a slog, and I don't think I will ever do 800 pages again. Although never say never. When I say never, then the next thing I have 1,000 pages.
Right.
Wow. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rachel, you had raised your hand earlier. Did you want to say something? You had raised your hand. You're on mute, but you had raised your hand. Or you were just waving?
I think I was probably waving. One of the questions, and it goes back to the colloquial language, is that often they spoke in dialect, or and I know accent is really hard to convey when you're trying to translate. And is that something that you put in, spoken dialect, or was that already obvious?
No, okay, so it's really, a dialect is such an interesting subject. So it was all in, well, not all. There were a lot of sections that were in original dialect. So, and that I didn't understand, and I had to go to Curzio Ginzburg because it's some was Venetian dialect and some was Torino dialect. So, those are all different languages, so it's sometimes really hard. And then to try and translate that so that you can give the reader a feel of the dialect is really hard. So a lot of times what I'll do, and what I did with Ana Maria Ortese, a book I translated together with Anne Goldstein, we would leave in little bits of the original dialect so that you could see the dialect, but then we would work it so that within the text you would understand what it meant. So it's sort of a finesse, but you know, that thing that Curzio Ginzburg said about preserving language difference. You know, originally publishers wouldn't even put a translator's name on the book or anything to do with translation, because they wanted to have the reader believe that this had been written originally in English. Now my aesthetic is to highlight all the time that what I'm doing is a translation. So it's sort of a shift in how we're working it.
I do recall now when I said I looked at the notes later, which other people probably did, or maybe you guys were smarter than me and you knew there were notes ahead of time, was that, like you said, there were some things in there and I thought, oh, it gave me the flavor, but I didn't know what it said. And then I think you translated a lot of those in the notes for us, you know, which didn't really, I mean, it didn't make a huge difference anyway. It was just small little snippets, but that was interesting.
Yeah.
I had another question I forgot to ask. I was just interested. The afterword I thought was really interesting too. So I'm just wondering if you had any contact, I don't know if it would be appropriate or not, or with Peg Boyers. It seemed like your notes and her notes were both very helpful. So I wondered if you talked at all or collaborated at all with her.
Yeah, actually, yes. And Peg was really helpful. I had translated the title for a long time. I just always thought about it in my head as the Family Lexicon. And that's all how I had, since I was 17, thought about it. And then she saw that and she said, you know what, it's not it's Family Lexicon. It's not with the article. It's Lessico Familiare. So she saved at the last minute something that I was, you're welcome, that somebody was, you know, so there's always something. And she was really helpful and just great. We had great conversations. We did lots of readings and events around the time that the book came out.
Oh, neat. Okay. Yeah, and just saying, as the reader who doesn't have that much, just as an educated person, I know about Italy, but I'm not like you guys. It was helpful, really helpful to read both of them at the end together, you know.
Yeah.
Then I have a question here from Vanessa. I want to read it because she typed it. So it says, thank you, Jenny McPhee, for joining us and taking our questions. I was wondering which other Italian post-war authors you might particularly recommend. Thank you. Does anybody else come to mind?
Well, so I love this Ana Maria Ortese, who's a Neapolitan writer who Elena Ferrante is always saying influenced her a lot. I love Cesare Pavese. I think he's amazing. Vittorini. I mean, there's so many beautiful post-war Italian writers. And then it goes up until about you know, there's Calvino, then around the 70s and 80s, they stop being so many and so great. But contemporary, he just died, but the Sicilian writer Camilleri, I really love a lot, and talk about dialect. His books are written all in dialect. And the guy who translated them, it never made it in English because he didn't, it was hard to capture.
The dialect.
But they're kind of good.
Then Andy Ho, who's also a French to English translator. We're not all French to English translators, but I know them, all of them, the best who are here. She said in the notes, I read the ebook, so you could click on the footnotes. In ebooks, there's no difference between footnotes and endnotes. But what was interesting about that's interesting to me, I don't know if Jenny knows anything about that, was Andy, they weren't noted. That's what I'm in the English, right? I mean, am I crazy? In the English, they weren't notes at all. Like you didn't know they weren't really end notes. It was, yeah, they weren't noted. So that's interesting to me that in the ebook, they went and linked them. because they would have had to do extra effort for that.
Yeah, the ebook better. Another writer I love is Rosetta Loy, Loy, post-war Italian. She's great.
Rosetta Loy. Okay. Cool.
So Eve, I'll tell you how I knew that there were endnotes. I don't like it when I'm reading a book and it suddenly ends because I didn't realize like the last 50 pages were endnotes. So particularly when you have one of these, you know, really pretty New York Review of Books things, I'll go through and I actually put, I fold down the page to show me where the actual end of the book is.
Oh, okay.
Because it drives me wild.
You need to know when you're ending. Yeah.
Jen, I do the same thing on the Kindle. I read a Kindle copy, and I always do the same thing where anytime I start a book, I'll like go to the end to see what percentage that is, because you think you're going to 100 and you're actually going to 89 or 75 or whatever, like depending on how much other content there is. Yeah, because you're like going along and then the book ends, and I hate that.
Yeah,
but yeah, in the Kindle, you could click the notes were were linked, so like you could just literally tap it and it would jump you to it. So
nice.
That was great.
Yeah, particularly ebooks, they'll throw in like a whole chapter of the next book, and I'm like,
oh yeah.
What?
I actually have a question. I have a question we didn't think of, or somebody else wants to modify the question, but I was thinking, and just what you feel comfortable telling us, Jenny, but is more about the logistics of working with the publisher as a translator. Is there anything you want to tell or can tell us about that?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that, which I always find quite amazing, is, you know, working as an editor, I would work really closely with the translator and edit the translations, and also just editing, you know, English. Line editing was like a normal part of what I did. My experience with publishing translations, you turn in the translation, there's not a lot of editing that happens after that. So you're kind of the editor too. So that's a little disconcerting. I wish there were more of an editorial process.
Even if that's really interesting. Even if the big publisher, because I wonder, but do they do? I don't know what copy editing where they're looking for typos, because that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, you know, even the copy editing, I mean, at New York Review Books they do it, but other publishers, in my experience, you give it to them, they're just gonna put it right on up. So there's no middle. It's very scary.
Yeah. Because you know, just for the work of just, you know, typos or whatever, it's just hard doing. It's like you said, especially like in 800, for example, in 800 words, it's massive. I mean, even in 80 words, it's really massive to be depending on you to catch every error. You know?
Right. I mean, in you know, literary translation, they're you know, we try to sort of stick together. It's paid very poorly. It's, you know, so slowly we've been advocating for getting a percentage, which
that's what I was going to ask too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is only a recent thing. So usually it was just fee.
So pay for hire or work for hire, just done, and
work for hire. Yeah, I mean, very, very badly paid, which is why so many women probably. You know, we're used to being badly paid. So it's hard to break into it. The publishers we don't publish a lot of literature and translation, which is so sad compared to other countries. Like France will do 50% of their books will be in translation. In America, it's 3%. So,
well, and I wonder too if there's different areas, like a friend of ours, Corinne McKay, she's been working, she is really active in the outdoors, and so she's been talking directly to French publishers, because if you kind of research the field, you can tell me, people say, I don't know if it's true or not, they say, oh, well, you need to go to the US publisher because they buy the rights and then they do the translation, which seems to be the traditional way. But for example, Corinne's been going to smaller publishers that publish like memoirs on climbing Annapurna, or memoirs on, you know, trekking in Nepal or whatever, or you know, these kind of outdoor legends, and that were French. And so that she went to the French publisher and she's been translating some of their works in English, but that's nonfiction and it's, you know, real niche-y. And it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think try everything.
Yeah.
I mean, there are no real rules. And now with the internet and, you know, Amazon Crossing, I think is really great now too. They're just doing masses of translations. So I think the rules are changing, and it's not such a tiny little rarefied thing.
The main editor, was that last year? Does anybody? She came and spoke, or she's been there a couple of times. She comes to the American Translators Association in recent years conference, and she spoke. Does anybody remember? Was it last year? It was super interesting, and she had several presentations. I went to one where she talked about kind of how it's opening up and the different things she's doing to do that. Their lead editor.
Yeah. No, I think I went to that too, ATM.
Yeah. So, well, good. Does anybody else? You can either raise your hand or you can unmute yourself, or I will unvideo you or make you so you can be on video if I turned you off. Anybody else? I don't want to say anything. Liam, Nancy, Claire, Lisa. Lisa, you usually have such good comments. You don't want to make any comments? Or I'm putting you on the spot. Or Rosie.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Speaking of logistics, do you just use Word or Scrivener or anything like that?
You know, I now use Google Docs just because it's always there.
Yep. Also, Word kind of faints after a few hundred
and it
words.
saves it for me all the time. So if I could, the way I work, I might do, 2 paragraphs and then go cook dinner or something, and then come back and do another quick thing while I can. Google Docs is perfect for that. If I forget to save too much on Word, I would forget to save.
Too stressful. Yeah.
So yeah. So that's what I use mostly.
And do you work off of an Italian copy, or do you have a? See, I use Trados, which has both languages side by side. So I'm just wondering if you just erase it as you go.
No, we have all these licenses to Trados at where I work, and I should get one. But I've never sort of invested in it myself. But I hear.
Yeah, I don't know. It probably would be very. I don't know if you'd find it a very comfortable format for a book of that length. But when you talk about going through and changing things, I'm like, oh my God, that's one button with Trados. I can't imagine.
I know. And also I should have a whole, word lexicon. I just should have a whole, that I'm tracking my terminology.
A glossary, yes.
Yeah, but I do, and I should do all of that, but it does cost money.
Jenny, sorry, and do you use like glossaries, or do you create new glossaries and new?
I do. I try. So much is done in the editing part in the end. As I go through, I'm just constantly sculpting, and then I make glossaries.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Especially for something this long.
I have a question. What Jen said though, do you get like a electronic copy of the Italian text, like the manuscript, and then work from that, or how do you do it?
I wish you could see here. It's just I have this right on me. I don't know if you can see it. It's just a book on a stand.
No.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
No Word document. Wow.
Old school. Very old school.
That's interesting.
That's why it's taking me so long.
Interesting.
Wow.
So, sadly, I actually do have to go.
Oh, sorry.
This is my work day, and
we went about an hour. We went a few minutes over an hour, so that was certainly wonderful of you to give us your time. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
I am what I now call a translation activist. So anything I can do in any way to support translation, I feel like
thank you.
Living in a better world if everybody was a translator.
You're always translating in many different ways.
That's right.
Translating life.
And
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to
Thank
join
you for
your
having
book club.
Okay, bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Eve.
Send me the information, Eve.